We will be recording the meeting this morning, and this is Amanda with the district, and I'm actually going to turn it over to our chief engineer and director, Michael Muka, right away to do a little introduction and just share a little bit about the recently passed infrastructure bill, and then key up Matt Seib, who will be presenting today. So Michael, go ahead.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone to our last owner meeting of 2021. We have a lot of timely information to share with you today. The main topic of discussion is our energy plan. Over the next 6 years, the district plans to invest about $210 million on critical infrastructure projects around capacity upgrades, addressing new regulatory requirements, and replacing aging infrastructure. Of that amount, almost a fourth of it will focus on replacement of aging energy-related infrastructure. So we felt it was a good time to share with you more details about these energy projects, such as what they are intended to address, and to a certain extent, what they're not going to address. I'd also like to briefly touch on possible longer-term policy issues that may happen as a result of the energy study work we've been doing. But before I turn it over to our process and research engineer, Matt Seib, to dive into our energy study, I have a few other items, hot topics to report on, and just some general updates. First, I want to, during the last owner meeting, I mentioned that Director of Engineering, Bruce Borelli, was retiring. And since that time, we have welcomed a new Director of Engineering, Kathy Wunderlich, to the district to fill Bruce's big shoes. Kathy brings to the district 25 years of engineering experience, working many years for Strand Associates, progressing from a technical engineer to a senior associate. She worked on several pumping station rehabilitation projects here at the district while she was at Strand. She then moved back to or didn't move back, but she moved to the Wisconsin DNR to serve as the public water engineering section chief for the last 8 years. She's been on the job now for 2 months, and I know she is eager to work with all of you. So let's welcome Kathy. Did want to give you a little bit of information on the infrastructure bill. I think there's some interesting news, encouraging news, as well as some challenges with the infrastructure bill. As I'm sure you all know, the nation has a $1.2 trillion infrastructure package. And this is good for the nation and calls attention to the state of infrastructure and the need to reinvest. We have been at the district closely monitoring the bill's progress all year. This bill is multifaceted, and we are digging in, working with some of our trade associations who are on the Hill to do a deeper dive into the details in the coming weeks, and with our state officials to find out what opportunities will be available to us. Of the $1.2 trillion, approximately $50 billion of it will be directed toward water infrastructure. And that's for all 50 states, and that would be distributed over 6 years. And of that $50 billion, about $12 billion will go to clean water agencies, such as the district. It appears the funds will target mostly struggling communities and those underserved for wastewater treatment. Emerging contaminants such as PFAS will also be funded, but mostly on the drinking water side. funding will flow through the state revolving fund loan programs. So the DNR will be heavily involved through the development of administrative rules, working with the EPA on how those funds will be distributed. The state revolving fund loan program, it's called the Clean Water Fund here in Wisconsin. It's a very strong fund. The Wisconsin we will receive, we just learned about $317 million from the program over those next 5 years for loans and grants. And they would be distributed gradually over the next 5-year period, not in 5 separate similar increments. The DNR sees this as a tweak to the existing Clean Water Fund Principal Forgiveness Program, which the district is currently not eligible for. We're too large. So in terms of principal forgiveness, we may not be able to receive grants, but we could receive loans, although we are using the loans extensively already. There is also a Buy American provision that could add complexities to the procurement of mostly equipment, and that will be administered separately and not by the EPA, and that hasn't been set up yet. Funding will be available if funding is available to the district. Our commission may have some policy choices to resolve, such as do we accelerate cash financing or build up reserves? If there are impacts on service charges, they would likely be gradual and over several years. The infrastructure package will likely have other side effects. Some of them could be challenging for the district and likely challenging for all of you as owners. In times of a good economy, construction project costs increase. And a really good example of that is when the economy was low in 2008, we bid out about $70 million worth of infrastructure after around 2011 and 2012, and our bids were coming in between 10 and 20% below our projected estimates or engineering estimates. So we are expecting that our estimates in our CIP may have to be adjusted depending on how work flows out and how much competition there is for our jobs and our projects. We're also going to be seeing a competitive labor market. We'll all be experiencing that as we are hiring. We've been experiencing that with COVID-19 as we've been emerging from the pandemic. But with projects at an all-time high, competition for skilled labor and engineers and STEM-related jobs is going to be even more competitive. So we are discussing at the district efforts to accelerate some of our ongoing workforce development initiatives. On the positive side, owner communities may be eligible for Clean Water Fund funding and for forgivable loans, even though the district may not. This funding may be able to fund private property inflow and infiltration reduction, green infrastructure projects, and workforce development. Given that the district has decades of experience utilizing the Clean Water Fund, we are going to hold a workshop or possibly a series of workshops for owner communities on how this program works. Because applying for Clean Water Fund loan is not for the faint of heart. They're very complex, and administering them requires a lot of coordination. And we have figured out how to do that at the district. So we're going to hold some workshops, and that is something I think will be positive. I'm going to be meeting with the DNR along with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District in Green Bay later this month to get a better sense of what the DNR is thinking and to advocate for our collective interests. And so you can expect to see, I guess, wrapping up this, an owner workshop sometime after the first of the year. And I will continue to provide updates to you in my monthly newsletters to you on what we're learning about the infrastructure package. I also encourage you to start plugging into state DNR-led webinars. If you see them announced when they are advertised, we will push them to you when they come to us. So don't press the lead on them. And while I'm been focusing on water infrastructure, of course, you all have roads and maybe some bridges, and there are infrastructure funds available there as well. And so make sure you stay plugged into what's going on. The last thing before I turn it over to Matt is that in 2022, we are going to evaluate our service charges methodology. This is something that utilities should do on a periodic basis. The district hasn't reviewed its service charge program since the 90s, and we believe it is time to do a thorough review. We see some challenges with our current system that need to be addressed. And we have also heard from you about challenges that you experience, but we want to learn more before we proceed. So you can expect yet another owner meeting in the first quarter of next year to gather your thoughts and questions about service charges. And we will use your input to work with the commission on a path forward. We expect that looking at service charges will be a multi-year effort, similar to what we did for the process of reviewing our connection charges policies a few years back. So that's what I have. Amanda, I'll just pause there briefly to see if there are any questions on this before I turn it over to Matt for the bulk of our presentation today.
Absolutely. So if anyone has any questions for Michael, you could unmute yourself. Also, we have the chat open throughout the presentation today. So if you prefer to throw your questions in the chat, we will have a Q&A section here at the end of the meeting, and we can get to them then as well. So whatever is more comfortable for you.
Thank you. There'll be more to come.
All right, Matt, you are up.
All right, let me get everything fired up here. All right, are you seeing my screen?
We're seeing your, yes, we're seeing PowerPoint. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Matt Seib, the process and research engineer here at the district. And I was tasked with leading this energy management master plan effort here at the district over the past 2 years. So I'm going to be summarizing about 22 months worth of work in about a half an hour. So I'm going to be going through this at a pretty high level, kind of covering the big picture points, not getting into a lot of the details. Again, as Amanda mentioned, please feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'd like to tee up things right away by saying we really want to hear some responses from all of you at the end of the presentation, and we have 2 specific questions. So we'd like to know, do you understand why the district has done this energy management master plan? And we'd also like to know if you all understand the path forward. So we'll be asking those questions at the end. Be thinking about that as I go through the rest of the information here. So first of all, what is it? What is this plan? Why did we do it? In very basic terms, it's intended to be a plan to help guide the district on ways to replace aging equipment. And the goal was really to help the district understand how the district could do things differently in the future to make changes to how we produce and use energy. And so really the motivation for this project is centered around aging infrastructure. As Michael mentioned, we have a lot of assets at our facilities that are aging out, and it's time to replace those assets. And so really that's the impetus for this effort. We did not start this by wanting to think about new additions of infrastructure or new projects just for the sake of dealing with an energy component. We're warehousing this within the context of we have assets that we need to manage anyway. And so again, just keep in mind as I go through the rest of the information here, we're just talking about things the district could do differently. No decisions have been made around anything that I'll be presenting at this point. There are still several steps that need to take place before we would ever put a shovel in the ground. Our commission would have to give approval to everything, and there would be plenty of opportunities for input along the way as we continue to think about how to address aging infrastructure needs. A couple quick definitions, just so we're all on the same page. So I'm going to be talking about cogeneration. So what that is using a fuel such as natural gas in an engine to produce both electricity with the generator, but also extracting heat from that system that could be beneficially used. We'll also be talking about biogas. So we produce biogas in our digesters. That gas potentially can be purified into what's known as renewable natural gas. This is something that the Dane County landfill is currently doing with their large RNG project. We'll also be talking a lot about hot water, and I'm not meaning water to do the dishes or take a shower or the laundry. We use a lot of thermal energy here at the district, and we move that energy around using hot water. So we're heating a lot of processes with hot water. We're using it to heat our buildings, and counterintuitively, we also use hot water to cool buildings in the summer with absorption chillers. And also just the distinction about the word power. We can think of this as two different ways. There's demand and then consumption. So a lot of what I'll be covering is focused on consumption, the total quantity of energy that the district consumes. But it's also important to recognize that demand for the district is likely different than what most people think about because of our scale. Our instantaneous demand at the plant is on average around 3.2, 3.3 megawatts. And so, and that's at one facility. If you're thinking about something like a school district or a number of buildings contained with a municipality, your consumption might be unparalleled to ours, but we're using all of that through essentially 1 meter. So we have to think about how we procure and use power a little bit differently here. Okay, so what did we look at with the study? This was primarily focused on the Nine Springs wastewater treatment plant. And we were really focused on the heat and power and biosolids process areas at the facility. So those are the ones outlined in red. And the reason we didn't look at the whole facility is because a lot of our liquid treatment processes are currently undergoing upgrades right now. So there's no aging infrastructure driver to those areas. We've already thought about energy management as we've developed plans for upgrades in those areas. So it didn't make sense to include those in the scope of this project. And so then we had a number of considerations around what it means to think about energy. So we're obviously thinking about things like our total demand, the efficiency of our processes, how reliable and resilient are the processes at the plant, and also how reliable and resilient are the sources of energy that we use to power the facility. We also wanted to understand how to increase generation of renewables and increase our use of renewable energy. And of course, greenhouse gases is sort of our general metric for understanding the environmental footprint of using energy and cost. And so, you know, these are our basic metrics that we would use in the industry anyway to understand these things. But we also reflected on, you know, the values of our owner communities and what their stated positions are on aspects of sustainability and energy. And as some examples, if we look at some of the larger owner communities that we serve, they all have stated energy and sustainability goals. And by population, Madison, Fitchburg, Middleton, and Monona account for about five of every six people served by the district. And more generally, Dane County also has sustainability and energy goals that are relevant to what we're talking about. And, you know, that body covers our whole service area. So we believe that the types of things we've been studying and looking to understand in this project are in line with the energy and sustainability values of our owner communities. So the first thing we did with the study was baseline our energy situation. So we wanted to look at how much energy we're using, what form that energy is in, and how we're using it. So what this figure is showing is that we're purchasing energy in different forms. So we're purchasing electricity and natural gas and vehicle fuels. We're also producing a lot of our own fuel in the form of digester biogas. And then we're using that fuel in different ways, that energy in different ways to drive operations at our facilities. So a lot of it is electricity. One thing I'll point out is you'll notice the amount of thermal energy that we use is quite significant. And what's probably pretty apparent is that the way that we use biogas at the facility is very complex. We're shunting it all over the place. And one thing I'll draw your attention to are these efficiency or losses. So by using this gas, the equipment that we currently operate isn't as efficient as newer equipment. And another thing to point out is our use of vehicle fuels is a small component of our overall energy situation. So the takeaway here is we're using fuels in different ways and they're going to different places and we're using a lot of it. The next thing we did was look at our current overall demand for electricity. And then we wanted to forecast out what our demand for electricity would be in the year 2040, assuming that we did nothing to innovate our asset situation here at the district. We would just be replacing assets in kind with similar levels of technology and not looking to make any kinds of changes to seek efficiency or improvements or demand reductions. And based on population growth estimates, we forecast a noticeable increase in the amount of power that will be required to operate our facilities if we don't take any steps to innovate or change our processes to seek more efficient ways of doing things. The next thing we did was drill down a little bit more in detail to look at, you know, what does our energy use footprint look like compared to other wastewater treatment facilities in the country. And so that's what the graph on the left is showing. So we're the orange bar in the middle. What this is telling us is that we're about average. Our energy intensity per unit of wastewater treated is pretty typical. So there's not a lot of easy low-hanging fruit that we could go after to reduce our energy intensity for treatment. And then the figure on the right is showing a more detailed breakdown of how we're using energy by different process area at our facilities. And in some categories, we're actually using less energy than is typical on a national average. and in some areas we're using more. So the first thing I'd like to point out is that we use a lot more electricity for wastewater pumping than a typical facility, and that's because we have to pump all of our treated water away through 2 force mains. The other thing I'll point out is that we essentially offset a lot of that extra demand because we are using a lot more biogas than a typical facility to generate electricity with our cogen systems. So the next thing we wanted to look at was reliability and resiliency, and some of the key conclusions that we came up first with reliability is that we can make reliability improvements to our infrastructure by simplifying some of our processes. We can simplify our digestion, and we can simplify the hot water system that we use to convey thermal energy to make our the plant a little bit more reliable. And we can also improve reliability simply by replacing aging assets. And some of the big ticket items here are our cogen engines, a lot of our hot water boilers, and some of our pumping systems. But then when we think about resiliency, really the simple answer here is that if we want to improve the resiliency of our operations, it really means thinking about putting in backup generators here at the plant and at our pumping stations. And what I mean by resiliency is our ability to always have a source of power to continue operations. And so things like solar, or using hauled waste to produce more biogas, or relying on our cogen systems entirely to power our facilities are not considered resilient options. They're good for an average day, but they're not good for an exceptional day when there might be difficult things going on out in the world, like a big storm or something like that. When we think about increasing renewable energy generation, one of the clear things that we could consider is replacing our cogen systems with more efficient versions. So the engines that we use currently are from the late 80s, early 90s. They're not as efficient as newer versions. And so by simply replacing those engines, we could increase our electricity production and our ability to capture thermal energy noticeably. So the takeaway here is we can get more power from the same fuel that we're already producing from our digesters. If we want to go further and think about other ways to increase renewable energy use and generation, for the district, large-scale solutions are really what we need. And this goes back to my comment earlier about understanding the nature of our demand. We have a significant demand at a single facility. So a large-scale solution is more appropriate for us, something like a large solar array. Doing things like putting solar panels on a lot of rooftop buildings just isn't going to get us far enough in a cost-effective way because of the nature of how we use power. And the other kind of aha here is that the district doesn't have to do this by itself. So a lot of times people think that to advance sustainability and renewable energy goals, you have to do this yourself. You've got to put solar on your own roof, things like that. But really, procuring renewable energy from the grid is a viable option. And that means looking at things like partnerships with MGE or other key players in the energy sphere. And really, this is important for the district because if we were to go to a model where we're procuring renewable energy through the grid instead of trying to generate it ourselves with our own assets, it means that we'd have a much larger asset management burden. So by procuring it, we could potentially reduce our asset management burden and simplify our own operations. So when we think about partnerships or ways to procure renewable energy, one thing the study has identified as a good option for the district is MGE's RER program, the Renewable Energy Rider program. So in this model, MGE would own and operate a large solar array. It would be constructed on district property, and the power from that array would go through the grid and could be counted against not only the power at the plant, but also our pumping stations, which is something that we would not be able to do if we were constructing and operating the array ourselves. And the other big takeaway is that a program like this would incentivize the development of new renewable energy generation sources, and it's predicted to potentially reduce our energy costs per year by up to $100,000. And something to point out is that some of our owner communities have already participated in this program. So Middleton, Madison, and Fitchburg already have RER agreements. Dane County has an RER agreement. They've also got an agreement with Alliant Energy through a different program that's similar. And there are other municipal key bodies in the area that are doing this, like Madison School District, Middleton Cross Plains School District. So this is a program that other agencies in the area are already taking advantage of. Another model would be to purchase renewable power from MG&E through their Green Power Tomorrow program. So here we'd be procuring wind or solar energy, but the caveat is we'd be getting this from existing generation facilities, so we wouldn't necessarily be incentivizing the development of new renewable energy sources. And we'd be paying a premium for this power. And if we were to go 100% in this direction, it could result in additional costs of over $300,000 a year. So this may not be the best option on its own to fulfill objectives of using renewable energy or reducing our environmental footprint, which is why we're thinking about other ways to make improvements at the plant. One big takeaway is that really everything that we looked at would result in some level of greenhouse gas emission reductions. So what this table is generally showing is that if we continue to operate our facilities the way we have been and maintain similar technology and ways of doing things, we come up with a number. If we look at some of the alternatives that I'll explain later, that look at making changes in the plant, making changes in the way that we procure or generate renewable energy, we can significantly reduce the emissions related to the energy that we use. And the caveat here is that we don't have to find necessarily the most optimal solution for greenhouse gas emissions, because we can always go back to something like the Green Power Tomorrow program or some other program where we could account for our emissions in a different way. We don't have to do all of that work within the fence at the plant or our pumping stations. So now we'll get into probably the thing you're most interested in. What does this cost? So before I show you the interesting chart here, I just want to go over two big points. So the first one is the district expects to have to spend a noticeable amount of money on aging infrastructure in the future, no matter what. So Michael already covered that. The other point here is that what this study is trying to do is help us understand that we could spend a similar level of capital funds or perhaps lower and come up with solutions that deliver more value to our owners and our ratepayers. So what this is showing is a 20-year net present value life cycle cost. So this is capital and O&M costs of what we called our baseline, and then 4 alternatives that we considered. And I'll explain those alternatives in a few slides. So what this is showing is that the baseline condition is assuming that we do nothing to innovate. We just simply replace aging assets in kind and continue to do things the way we've been doing them. That life cycle cost over the next 20 years is estimated to be in the realm of $90 million for these energy related projects. Some of the alternatives that we identified come with a range of costs. The two in the middle would result in slightly higher costs. The first and the last alternative come in with costs similar or potentially lower than the baseline. And the black bars represent what we believe is the level of financial uncertainty that comes with each of those alternatives. And all of these alternatives deliver additional energy value that the baseline does not contain. But so the takeaway here is there's some big costs coming, but we're going to have to deal with these costs anyway because of our aging infrastructure situation. So what did some of those alternatives consider? Well, one avenue would be to consider continuing to use biogas here at the plant with our cogen systems and upgrade those to be more efficient, as I mentioned earlier. Alternatively, we could go in a completely different direction and sell all of our biogas as renewable natural gas. This would simplify our infrastructure and result in a revenue stream for the district to be able to fund other projects or procure renewable energy in other ways. The study is also recommending that we look at simplifying our hot water systems and consider stopping our Badger Mill Creek effluent pumping. This would result in an energy savings of over 1 million kilowatt hours a year. And I'll just stop and pause here and point out that this is a sensitive topic. Again, no decisions have been made. This study is just pointing out that we use a lot of energy for pumping. We have 2 effluent force mains, and if we are looking to reduce energy from pumping, this is a situation that we should study further to understand if there are energy savings available. Another thing that the study looked at was considering work from our recent biosolids management plan. And that study recommended that we consider things like simplifying our anaerobic digestion processes and look at making a different biosolids product that would result in less labor and energy for hauling and application of product on farm fields. And lastly, we should consider some kind of large-scale solar partnership like the MGE RER program. So we looked at a lot of other things that didn't quite make it. And so these are examples of ideas that we considered. The study isn't saying that these are bad ideas. They're just not a good fit for the district right now for some reason. Either the technology is not mature enough for us, it's too expensive, it's just not a good fit for our operations, or some other reason. So we looked at things like trying to recover heat from our effluent, battery storage, microgrids. I'll point out the rooftop solar thing. So I've mentioned before that that's generally probably not a good fit for the district, with the exception of our maintenance facility, which is already set up for solar expansion. So that's something that we could consider. And there were many, many other energy related concepts that we considered that just were not a good fit for the district at the moment, but doesn't mean that they're not something that we can't revisit in the future. So the study basically laid out 4 potential paths forward. So we looked at all these different ways that we could make improvements at the plant, and we distilled them down into 4 scenarios that are represented in this table. So we called those the enhanced baseline, maximizing renewable energy production, energy grid resilience, and reducing infrastructure complexity. So the first scenario, the enhanced baseline, involves upgrading our cogen systems with more efficient models to capture more energy from our biogas. It's looking at upgrading our hot water systems. It's looking at reconfiguring our digestion and biosolids processes, and a large-scale solar partnership with MGE. The next scenario is similar to the first, but it goes a step further in trying to find additional ways to capture thermal energy from our biogas systems and beneficially reuse that at processes in the plant. So that would be adding some infrastructure to do that. The third scenario is really focused on trying to understand what it would mean for the district to generate all of its own energy reliably inside the fence at the plant to keep the plant going if there was a grid power failure without using backup generators. And the last scenario is, as it says, looking at reducing our infrastructure complexity. So this is the one that goes in a completely different direction. We now would get rid of our cogen systems. We would clean up our biogas, purify it, sell it to the natural gas system as renewable natural gas, and generate revenue to procure renewable energy in other ways. And so what this table is showing is that for some of the evaluation criteria that we were judging all of these scenarios off of, all of them deliver value in terms of improving our reliability. They all result in generating additional renewable energy. They all reduce the greenhouse gas emissions footprint associated with our operations. But then when you start to look at things like the impact to our infrastructure, some of them have a neutral outcome. Those are the ones with white boxes. One results in additional infrastructure, which is something we've decided is maybe not in our best interest. And one reduces the level of infrastructure that we have to manage at our facilities, which is something that we see as desirable. And then when it comes to cost, one of these is similar to our baseline costs. One is expected to be lower because of the revenue that it would generate, and two would be higher than our baseline costs of just maintaining our status quo. So we consider those to be less desirable because of that. The electricity provider line on this table is just meant to acknowledge that we're getting our energy from different sources and these different options. That's not a good or bad thing, it's just acknowledging that. But ultimately what the study has concluded is that it recommends that we consider this enhanced baseline or reduce energy infrastructure complexity scenarios moving forward. So the study has not given us the ultimate answer. It's told us that there's more than one way forward for the district that delivers benefits, and we need to study these two options in a little more detail moving forward to understand how to ultimately commit ourselves to infrastructure replacement options. So what that looks like is we then further drilled down the options within those scenarios and tried to prioritize what the infrastructure replacement needs are going to be. And the first priority for us are assets related to heat and power. So our cogen systems, our boilers, our hot water systems are all kind of priority items. So the plan is recommending that we first go into facility planning to understand what to do there first, and then that would precipitate into design and construction. And then staggered behind that by several years would be looking at ways to make changes and improvements to our biosolids facilities and assets. And the reason those are staggered back is, one, to help balance capital costs over time, but also it's acknowledging that those assets are not in need of replacement as soon as our heat and power projects are. And then along the timeline here, we would also have miscellaneous projects that are smaller in nature, don't require the same level of planning and design effort, but we'd be spacing those out to deal with specific assets as they come up. So kind of in summary, again, this energy management master plan is really about guiding the district to understand how we can deliver value to our ratepayers and our owners. It's outlining options for ways that we could replace our aging infrastructure in a different way. And it's showing us how we can make changes from our status quo that help us advance our goals around energy use and the impact that energy has. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Michael now to kind of facilitate a discussion. And again, these are the two questions we wanted to ask all of you.
Thank you, Matt, for that comprehensive summary of where we are so far. So Amanda and I will be, if you put a question in the chat or raise your hand, I'll recognize you. If you want to make a comment or have a question, please do so at this time. Matt, as people are thinking, one of the things that we sometimes don't think about is our air permit, which is something that has occurred. And we received our first air permit about 4 years ago. And I think it would be helpful if you could share insights on some of our challenges with air quality that we've had to tackle, and I know we're factored into some of these options.
A good comment, Michael. Yeah, so two of the things that we looked at in the study included issues with regulations and also funding. But so to the regulation aspect, most people think about our organization as having a permitting need focused on water treatment, but we also have an air permit, and we also have regulations that we need to fulfill around our biosolids. So the study was focused on trying to help us understand the implications of what it would mean to do things in a different way. So if we were to increase our biogas production and use of biogas on site, that would potentially move the district into a different air permitting category that may come with additional costs and restrictions. Conversely, if we were to go in the other direction where we sell our biogas, that could have implications on our air permit in the other way, and that we may not have, it likely would not result in us eliminating our air permit entirely, because we'd still be using boilers, but it would change the nature of what it means to comply with an air permit.
So there is a question.
Yes, I see it. I see it, Amanda, from Commissioner Meyer. And I'll just read what Commissioner Meyer said. I wasn't clear where the MG&E RER large-scale solar electricity generation project landed in the 4 options that you summarized, Matt, at the end. Which scenario would that potential approach fall in?
Excellent question. I apologize for not making that more clear. That is kind of an a la carte option that could be attached to any one of the scenarios that we looked at. For the sake of this analysis, it's connected to the first, second, and fourth options. We did not include it in the analysis of that third option, where we'd be producing all of our own power inside the fence, just because we wouldn't necessarily need a big array outside the fence to meet our needs at that point. But that is a project that is flexible in its size and design, depending on how we think about other options that we would choose to do inside the fence of the plant.
What other questions or comments do you have about this? Commissioner Foster.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I was just curious. So it's clear that the Energy Management Master Plan, the sort of the goals behind it are really focused around managing our infrastructure, and sort of while we do that, what are the sort of the thinking about energy use, both from a cost and a sort of sustainability perspective. Has there been any work sort of in parallel around kind of determining from a more of a sort of sustainability perspective, or from a global carbon emissions perspective, what would it look like for the district to establish our own sort of net zero goals? And there's a lot of different ways that that could be defined, but I guess in those scenarios, are there any of those that sort of achieve some level of, we're taking responsibility for the carbon emissions that come from our energy use? Or I guess I'm just trying to understand, like the one that looked like it was dismissed, that would sort of maximize renewable energy because of, I'm assuming because of the higher cost. Would that exceed kind of taking responsibility for our own carbon emissions associated with energy? Is that above and beyond? Or like, I guess, has there been any attempts to sort of set a target for ourselves that we could say we are in some way, we are either producing or buying or et cetera, a certain amount of sustainability related to our energy use? I know it's a little bit convoluted way to ask it, but I think maybe Matt's tracking on what I'm asking.
Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Commissioner Foster. I think I understand what you're trying to ask and articulate, and there's a couple points there. So the first one I'd like to cover is, so in that second scenario, the maximize renewable energy generation is focused on what it would mean to try to extract all the energy that's practically able to be captured at the plant. And what that alternative is really showing is that it's not cost effective to just go after energy because it's there. So it would require the district to spend a lot more money to go after a small amount of energy. And so it's something we could do. It's technically feasible, but it may not be in our best interest from an economic standpoint. And so that leads into your more general question about, does the district have a goal or policy specifically related to carbon emissions and things like that associated with their operations? We do not have one of those at the moment. And that's something that we discussed at the beginning of this whole journey. We discussed whether it would make sense to establish a policy or a goal that we would need to fulfill. And we decided that we wanted the study to help inform what those might look like instead of setting them ahead of time. So as an example, if we would have set a policy that just says, we want to go after all the renewable energy that's available within the fence, that would have likely led us to that second option that may have been very expensive. And so the study is helping us understand how to approach these concerns around emissions and what it means to support the generation of renewables in the most cost-effective way. So we had been assuming, I think, informally going into the study, that when we talk about increasing use of renewable energy, that means that we have to do it ourselves. But what the study is really revealing is that we can fulfill that goal and don't have to do it on our own. And so, that has a big implication on what we would perhaps develop for policy in this area. So that's something for further discussion, I think, with Michael and you commissioners. But really, again, the purpose of this project in a way was to help inform our thinking on those kinds of topics. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I really appreciate that, Matt. And it sounds like this work is really going to help inform that other question around perhaps, both what our goal should be and what are our options for meeting that goal. And I think it'll be great to continue that conversation with the commission. At least personally, to get a sense of that perhaps before we make decisions on the direction of the energy management master plan. so that we know kind of what our ultimate goals are around energy use and sourcing. And so that sounds great. Sounds like we're on the right path for that. Appreciate it.
Matt, as I'm waiting for more questions or comments, maybe you could outline some of the next steps of what our owner communities can expect in terms of this journey we're on and the decisions along the way.
Well, so the immediate next step would be to report the conclusion of this work to our commission early next year. Part of why we're having this meeting today is our commission wanted to hear from our owner communities and get their impression on this effort. Once the commission hears that, we'll hear what they have to say. Commissioner Foster was just alluding to some of the things I think he's thinking about. Beyond that, we're already beginning to strategize how we're going to roll into that first line of work, which is our heat and power improvement project. So we'll be, I believe, kicking off a facility planning effort related to that later this year, potentially, and that will take us several years, as is outlined in our CIP, to make decisions around how we want to use our biogas and some of our hot water issues, and then that'll move into design. So that will take some time. This is not something that we do overnight, because there's a lot of moving parts here. But so the next immediate steps are another touch point with our commission, and then beginning the process of facility planning to further refine direction on some of these big questions.
Thanks, Matt. Amanda, are there any other comments in the chat?
There are not. No, there are not, Michael.
Okay, I'm looking at our time. We're 3 minutes to the hour, and I'll just count to 3 to see if there's any last questions. The conversation in many ways is just starting to balance these, now that we have a clearer idea of the cost pathways and the trade-offs of now bringing that into the policy realm with the commission of what's most important, and where do we focus our investments. And so that work will take some time and to do, and we're excited to do that. So a lot more to come on this. And of course, if you have questions that occur to you between this meeting and tomorrow or whenever, you can email Matt directly or myself, and we'll make sure we get those questions answered. Or if you'd like us to set up meetings with some of your staffs, we'd be more than happy to do that as well. So is there anything else for the good of the order for today? Wish I could say I don't see any, because it's hard to see everyone, but I'm looking at the chat. I'm not seeing anything.
Michael, there is one.
Thank you, Mark. I just saw it pop up. Thank you, Amanda. Will the energy costs for improvements be in our rates or connection rates?
In other words, like the rates as far as just the usage rates, in other words, and just in the overall costs of your annual billings.
So Mark, are you indicating that the energy costs
Like treatment costs and things like that, or how does it actually, how is it all going to be paid for in terms of, obviously we're going to see an increase in rates, I would think, in terms of in order to pay for these improvements overall over the long term, correct? Is that kind of how that would?
Yes, our capital facilities plan has identified over the next 6 years what those costs would be based on very general, and it's looking at life cycle, and we've also built in operating costs, and those would be adjusted. And so, you know, we've projected that just based on general needs dealing with the energy infrastructure will be up to, you know, a 9% increase for all of our capital over the in service charges over the next 6 years. It could be less depending on what some of these options are, or it could be more. But that the CIP, the Capital Improvements Plan, has really been doing a really good job of starting to translate these costs into what it means for service charges.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any, and I want to thank you for your time and attention for this hour, and we'll be engaging you quite a bit over the next quarter after next year on a couple items with regard to infrastructure and of course the energy study. So we look forward to working with you, and just enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you.